in trying to reunify science and religion, is there any risk of censorship, controlling by religion, once again, over science?
Obviously, religion that doesn't even know its own tradition, religion that is scared of women and artists and scientists and homosexuals. Are you kidding? You know, religion is full of the demons of fear at this time. But it doesn't have to be. I'm hopeful, for example, this new Pope, Francis, is stepping away from all that fear. He seems to have far less fear in him than the last two papacies. I would like to see Pope Francis go on the road with the Dalai Lama. Go to different countries and talk about 5 issues that we can all agree on. The ecological crisis, the treatment of women. Of course, then he has to start doing something about it in the Catholic Church, be a little bit credible. Of course, the poverty, the unemployment, and
misemployment.
Pardon me?
Misemployment, as you call it.
Misemployment, yeah, right. So I think that would gain attention, a lot of years, because between the Dalai Lama and the Pope, there would be a lot of listeners, and the media would have to pay attention. But the real struggle isn't going to take place in the papacy. It's going to take place in the grassroots, where we start creating communities, small communities, that are integrating science and healthy spirituality, and that are doing it with the body too, and with a sense of celebration. You know, Thomas Berry, who's such a prophet in our time about ecology and so forth, he says that you can summarize the entire history of the universe with one word. That one word is celebration. So why aren't we celebrating? You know, so celebration itself carries so much power. It's a power of renewal. It's a power of artists wanting to join and get in and share their gifts and turn everyone on. So we mustn't underestimate the power of joy. Aquinas said you change people not by argument, but by delight. And celebration should be an act of delight, a banquet of delight. That's what worship should be.
This brings us directly to the Cosmic Mass.
Huh.
Because during our tour, so many people came up and said, so what about the Cosmic Mass? When you're going to have a Cosmic Mass? It's very interesting that we didn't have many theologians coming to your talks, but we had a lot of people that often are not going to church or not going anymore, but heard about you, read the first book, In Principio era la Gioia, or they have went online and found something, and they got this information about the Cosmic Mass. They're very excited. Mm-hmm. So can you tell something about your experience with the Cosmic Mass?
Well, I agree. I mean, just last night here at this program, numerous people came and said, when are we going to have a Cosmic Mass in Turin? When are we going to have a Cosmic Mass in Italy? Yeah. And I said, well, why not, you know? So obviously we'll be talking about that, and we should. And enlist a team, because it takes a team. It's not, the phrase in the rave movement is the posse is the priest. Mm-hmm. The posse is the priest. And that's very sound theology. Because, for example, in Native American ritual, the whole community creates a ritual. You don't have a canned thing that a priest marches down the aisle and says, this is it, take it or leave it. No, you have the community gathering and bringing their gifts of art and craftsmanship and all the rest to make it happen. So, my experience at Cosmic Mass really begins, I think, when I wrote the book, The Reinvention of Work. And the last chapter is on the reinvention of ritual. And I realized in writing that chapter that the modern age has left us so bereft for ritual. People are so hungry for ritual today that the making of rituals could be an industry, a new industry, a postmodern industry. And especially now when so many young people don't have full-time jobs. They have more time on their hands. And they could be enlisted to create rituals because the Cosmic Mass employs their language, the language of rave, the language of rap, the language of DJ and VJ, and all these computer electronic that the younger generation have. Why shouldn't we bring this into worship, just like in the 12th century Renaissance, they brought the invention of stained glass into the cathedrals. So it was when I finished that book, 2 weeks later, I handed my manuscript in. 2 weeks later, I met 6 young people from Sheffield, England. They had flown into a conference I was doing in Seattle, Washington, and they told me about their movement. They were rave people who found doing rave so powerful and exciting. Of course, rave is an all-night dance where you go into a trance, or you hope to, that they brought it to the parish priest, the Anglican priest in Sheffield, and said, we want to bring this to church. He said, fine, bring it in. 6 months later, the priest came to him and said, you have to leave the church now. They said, why? He said, I'm getting too many complaints that there are too many young people in church.
No.
Yes. So it must have been the last time that that sentence has been uttered on the planet. So they left the building, the church, and they got a secular place downtown, and they did it there for years. So they told me all this. They brought newspaper articles. So I flew over to Sheffield to check it out. I was very moved by it. They had a community of 600 people, many of them kids living on the street, because Sheffield had 40% unemployment because it's a mining area, and so there was a lot of alcohol in the homes. Kids were being thrown out by their angry fathers who were out of work and all the rest. So it was a healing place. Make a long story short, I asked them, how can I help you? They said, well, we're already using your Cosmic Christ theology, but if you were an Anglican priest, Episcopal priest, you could lead interference for us because you understand what we're doing and no one else does. So I prayed about it. The Pope had fired me. I had gotten my pink slip from Cardinal Ratzinger to leave the Dominicans. I said, well, the Pope doesn't need me. He fired me. So I went to the Episcopal bishop in San Francisco, and I said, here's the deal. I want to become Episcopal priest, but only for one reason, to work with young people to reinvent forms of worship. And he said, great. He said, the church isn't doing anything for young people. So we started it up in Oakland. And
that is in Grace Cathedral.
That was in Grace Cathedral, yes. Well, actually, part of the story is I got Anita Roddick, who's English woman, who started the Body Shop, to put up the money to bring 35 of these young England people to San Francisco with all their equipment, and there was a lot of equipment. And we did the first, we called it the Planetary Mass in the basement of Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. And Jerry, what's his name, the guy had the funeral for it, Jerry Garcia was there, among others, with his wife. And the musician.
The musician.
Yeah. And so the Mass went very well, and it got front page picture and everything in the San Francisco paper. They went home. 3 months later, there was a scandal in England. The young priest, the genius, who had put all this together, was fleecing some of his female flock. And he was married and had a baby and all this. It crashed in England. It all crashed because of journalists' headlines. You can see the headlines, you know. Here I was in Oakland, ready to start it up. So I say, well, what do we do? Well, we'll do it differently. First of all, be totally transparent. And it'll be more American. Because the English version was more structured and more contained. So ours is more free-flowing, it's more ecumenical, and I put a woman in charge who was not ordained, and that was the smartest thing I ever did. We've never had a scandal in 16 years with our masses. But we've had over 100 masses now, many in the Bay Area, but in other cities as well, including in Canada. And we've been training people to do it. But we just did a mass recently for 1,000 people in Colorado, and it's time to really go national and make it more visible. So that's how the Cosmic Mass came to be. But even in my Cosmic Christ book, which I wrote 25 years ago, I have a whole section on how the Cosmic Christ can reinvent worship, and how important it is to bring the body back, and the via negativa of the darkness, the grieving. You see, notice the Catholic Mass has this thing about penance. Mm-hmm. No, we don't need that. We need grieving. Everyone needs to grieve today. Mm-hmm. We're losing so much of the planet. And we all have so many issues of grief. And if we get bottled up in our grief, the creativity cannot flow. So we've got to deal with grieving in our ceremonies. And time and again, people come after the Mass and they'll say, I loved the Mass, but the most powerful thing for me was the grieving. They say, I grieve alone in my bedroom. And no one's ever asked me to grieve in a group before. And it's so much more powerful, you see. So there are many dimensions to this Mass that demonstrate its power for healing. And it's taking the tradition. We're not we're not dropping the Mass, we're not throwing the baby out with the bath. We're changing the form. Now, look at Catholicism historically. It's always had different versions of the Mass. There used to be a Dominican rite and a Benedictine rite and a Franciscan rite. Diversity used to be part of the game. But, of course, things have been centralized since the Vatican Council
I would-
by the two papacies.